Okay, so moving swiftly on, our next item is to hear from the team at the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner on their work in the past year and plans for the future. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr Brian Plastow, Commissioner, and Mr Ross MacDonald, Director. And I refer members to paper 4 and intend to allow up to 60 minutes for this session. So can I begin by asking the Commissioner to make a short opening statement to highlight the main points in his annual report, and then we'll move to questions.
Yeah, thanks, Convener, and it's always a pleasure to be before the Criminal Justice Committee and to discuss how biometrics are used for policing and criminal justice purposes in Scotland. As you've said, Convener, I'm joined today by Ross MacDonald. In the real world, Ross is an experienced Detective Chief Inspector with Police Scotland, but with the approval of the Parliament Corporation and the Chief Constable, he joined me recently on a 2-year temporary secondment, and that's to help us build some capacity and capability over a particularly busy period ahead. With the permission of the committee, I think I'd like to cover briefly 3 broad areas. One, to say a bit about my most recent annual report and accounts, as laid before the Parliament. Secondly, to say something briefly about the recent joint review of the laws of retention of biometric data that was laid in Parliament in October. And thirdly, just to give the committee a brief flavour of some current and planned activity in the year ahead. I'm very aware that the committee will have other issues that they wish to discuss, so I will be brief so that we can cover as much ground as possible. So turning to the first of these themes, in my annual report and accounts for 2023-24, which is the third annual report and accounts I've laid before the Parliament. It was laid just about a month or so ago, and that, of course, includes the audit of the financial performance statements by Audit Scotland. A few key highlights just to pull out for you from the annual report. So we highlight in there that last year we delivered our third assurance review. If members will remember that previously we've looked at how the police acquire biometric data from children and vulnerable adults. And in March of this year, the report that we laid before the Parliament was in relation to how the police use images and recordings. We continue to operate a low-cost function through a shared services arrangement with the Scottish Public Sector Ombudsman, and I've given evidence on that to the Finance Committee. We conducted 3 compliance assessments on the Code of Practice. Members will remember that the Code of Practice was approved by the Parliament in November 22, and last winter we conducted compliance assessments with Police Scotland, the SP and the PERC. And we found each organisation to be compliant in January 2024. We've also published easy-read versions of the code and the Code of Practice, and in June of this year we hosted the first ever Biometrics and Criminal Justice Conference in Scotland, and I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary who's just left for attending and opening that event. In our earlier reviews relating to children and vulnerable adults, the committee will remember that we made 4 recommendations to Police Scotland for improvement. 2 of those recommendations were about honouring the information rights of data subjects. One was about having distinct policies for children, and the other was about improving the quality of management information to improve Police Scotland's governance in this area. The committee will be pleased to learn that subsequent to the period of my annual report in July this year, Police Scotland managed to discharge all 4 of those recommendations. And, for example, Police Scotland now gives to every person arrested in Scotland this little leaflet here, which goes into the prisoner's property bag, and it explains to anybody who's been arrested and has their biometrics taken why they've been taken, what they'll be used for, and who they'll be shared with, and also information on the functions of the UK Information Commissioner and the functions of the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner. What that means is that in around 90,000 custody episodes in Scotland each year, people are now receiving their their information rights. In relation to children, Police Scotland has also introduced a new policy, and Police Scotland now only capture biometric data from children arrested by the police in Scotland if it's in connection with a violent or a sexual offence or otherwise by exception. And to give you a flavour of what that actually means, around about 4,000 children are arrested by the police in Scotland each year, and the new policy will mean that at least half of these children will now no longer have their biometric data captured. And then lastly, Police Scotland have now produced or are now producing better management information. You can search your browser, Police Scotland Biometrics. It will take you to a dedicated Police Scotland Biometrics page where they're publishing better management information in relation to things like data volumes they hold. And that's important in terms of transparency and accountability. And the reason for sharing all of that with you is that now that the impact of our work is starting to materialise, I can advise the committee that we're actually going to update our existing strategic plan around about February, and we're going to transition away from output-based key performance indicators that were necessary for a new organisation set up mid-pandemic to reporting on the impact and outcomes of our work. So that's about the annual report. Very quickly on the review of the laws of retention. In October of this year, and in partnership with Scottish Government, we published a joint review report which ostensibly looked at the provisions within the Criminal Procedure Scotland Act of 1995, sections 18 and 19, which is the power the police have to take biometrics from people who've been arrested. The report concluded that there was an insufficient evidence base upon which to determine the need for any legislative change, but in the course of doing the review, we have directed 4 recommendations at Police Scotland. One is about Police Scotland reviewing their existing biometric data retention policies, and we've recommended to them they must do that by October 2025, and they must build in periodic review, which is actually a requirement in any case under the UK Data Protection Act. We have also asked Police Scotland to review or accelerate the review of the retention of volunteer data in the same time period. And we have also encouraged Police Scotland again to improve their management information in relation to biometrics, to support better decision-making around retention periods, and also to improve their management information more generally, to see if there's any evidence to support the case for extension of the current 1-month period that's allowed for post-conviction sampling. We heard some anecdotal evidence that that might be a problem during the review. I'm pleased to advise the committee that the Police Scotland has accepted these recommendations and will look to conclude that work by October of next year. And then the last theme, convener, on current and planned activity. The committee might be interested to know that we're currently doing 2 assurance reviews in parallel. So we're having a look at how Police Scotland and the SPA Forensic Services use DNA, and we're doing that work in partnership with the Scottish Police Authority Corporate and the Leverhulme Institute of Forensic Science. And at the same time, we're having a look at how Police Scotland use the retrospective image search capability within PND, the Police National Database, which is a UK-wide intelligence system, and also within CADE, the Child Abuse Image Database, which again is a UK-wide database which seeks to disrupt those who would harm children and to protect children. And in both cases, the objective is to provide assurance to the Parliament that Police Scotland are using the data and these technologies lawfully, effectively and ethically. The DNA report we hope to bring before the Parliament in probably late February, and retrospective image search probably in late March. And also to mention that over the winter, we are going to rerun public attitude survey that we ran back in 2021 to measure public attitudes to the use of biometric data. This time we're doing it as part of the Scottish Police Authority Public Confidence Survey, so it'll be a far bigger sample size. Back in 2021, public confidence in the police use of biometric data in Scotland was actually very high. So it will just be interesting to see if anything has changed, and we'll have the results of that in March. And then just a couple more points very quickly is that during 2025 we are obliged by the legislation to conduct the first 3-year review of the Code of Practice, so the code that was approved by the Parliament in 2022. So we'll have that done by the autumn. And at that point we will have achieved everything that we set out to do in the first strategic plan. And the final point from me, Convener, I suppose, is just to say or to give the Parliament some reassurance that as I approach my 4th year in office, I suppose I'd just like to say to the committee that the way that biometric data is used in Scotland for policing and criminal justice purposes is generally in a very good place by comparison with other jurisdictions. So there are always issues around the periphery, but I suppose my key message is it really is in a good place in Scotland. And I'll stop there, Convener.
Thank you very much. Really interesting update, and I have to commend the annual report. There's a lot of really interesting detail in it, and I think it really reflects the breadth and detail of the work that's been undertaken this past year. If I can just step right in with a couple of questions. So you spoke a lot, obviously, about Police Scotland in the context of the assurance review work, the recommendations that have come out of that, and some of the compliance work that you've done, which is really interesting. And the committee notes, and I'm very interested in a letter that you shared with Police Scotland back in 2023, October 2023, with regard to the desk pilot. And the level of detail in the letter is to be commended. And essentially you set out some concerns that you have with regard to, and I'm not even going to attempt to sound as though I've got a technical brain, but essentially with regard to an aspect of that around storage, iCloud storage. So, I mean, I'm sure other members will be interested to come in on that, but I suppose I'm just interested in any update that you have with regard to that specific issue that's been flagged. And I think that maybe really reflects the value of your commissioner role in being able to pick up something like this and take it forward.
No, thank you, Convener. I can simplify this one to 2 issues. Essentially, this was about 2 issues. So, conventionally, rewinding time and wherever the police used to store data, it would be on a secure server inside a police building. And if somebody wanted to access that data for malicious purposes, they basically need to break into the police station and to do that. The world's moved on, and everything nowadays moves on to the cloud. And as members will be aware, the digital evidence sharing capability desk, which I strongly support as a concept because it's about a more effective and efficient justice system, it's hosted on the public cloud infrastructure, basically. So the concerns that I were highlighting in my letter to Police Scotland at that time were about 2 things. One was about the reach of the US Cloud Act. The US Cloud Act was a piece of legislation passed by the Obama administration in 2018, and for good reason. It's about fighting international criminality. But the reach of that act is such that it gives authority to US federal authorities to access data hosted on on or by a US headquartered company anywhere in the world. So the issue or the question was at that junction was, is that a risky thing to do? Yeah. Related to that was the second question of security, which is important because, as we all know, the internet gets hacked all the time, sometimes by malicious actors, sometimes by kids in their pyjamas. You've got nothing else to do, you know. So the point in raising these issues with Police Scotland was about due diligence. So in relation to the question of data sovereignty, the Scottish Police Authority and Police Scotland have done everything within their power in terms of having clauses inserted to contracts, etc., to mitigate those risks as far as possible. But it's an unescapable truth that if the FBI wanted to access that data, they could. Should that concern us? Probably not. And then the second question, which for me is more important, is just about that issue of security. And the reason for including specific examples in the letter that I wrote to Police Scotland last October was to show that even at a government level in the United States, you know, a number of US government agencies have been hacked and important data has been stolen. So, I mean, I think we are where we are with that one. The UK Information Commissioner has, since that the time when that letter was written, has confirmed that hosting Part 3 law enforcement data on the cloud is lawful, providing appropriate safeguards are in place. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm in a more comfortable position now than I was then, although you cannot eliminate all risk. I suppose that's a substantive point I would make.
Thank you. That's really helpful. One of the things that I did pick up, and I can't remember if it was in this letter or elsewhere, but is that it's an issue around legislation and reserved and devolved legislation. And obviously in the sort of biometrics world, you're having to kind of deal with or grapple with some reserved legislation and some devolved. And I'm just interested in, particularly in the context of this particular incident, just in your thoughts about how difficult that can be, or how governments are working well together in this space so that you can essentially do your job.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually quite a complicated layer of independent oversight in this space, because in the world of policing, biometric data is used for all different things in the overt world and also in the covert world. So, firstly, on a very basic level, the UK Information Commissioner is a whole economy regulator in relation to data protection law. Quite separately from that, the function I perform in Scotland is in relation to ensuring that the way that the police and the SPA and the park acquire, use, retain and destroy biometric data under domestic criminal procedure law is lawful, effective and ethical. The Data Protection Act doesn't concern itself with questions of effectiveness or ethics, for example. In England and Wales, we have a Biometrics and Surveillance Camera Commissioner. That post holder's functions are similar, but at the same time very different to mine, because under the Protection of Freedoms Act in England and Wales, biometric data is fingerprints and DNA, but not images, which seems bizarre because those are the most oftenly used type. And then on the covert side of policing, of course, you have the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, so the police can and do acquire biometric data from people under surveillance legislation And of course, there's also the terrorism dimension where the Commissioner for England and Wales, often wrongly described as a UK Commissioner, has UK-wide jurisdiction where biometric data is retained as part of a national security determination. What that actually means is someone's come to the attention of the police, they've not been charged or convicted of anything, but the police think this person could be involved in terrorist activities. So it's quite a complicated landscape. But I would say it works really well in the sense that there have now been 4 biometrics commissioners in England and Wales. The post is currently not filled, is probably the best way to describe it. I have enjoyed excellent working relationships with them. I enjoy an excellent working relationship with the UK Information Commissioner. So it all seems to work well. We're all interested in different things, but ultimately it's all about the same thing, you know.
For that. Okay, so I'm going to bring in members, and I'm going to hand over straight to Liam Kerr and then Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. 2 questions, if I may. Firstly, Dr. Plasto, we had a very interesting debate on AI in this Parliament just last week. What do you see as the opportunities and the challenges from increasing use of AI in relation to your field of biometrics?
So thank you for that question. And I suppose the first thing to say is that AI is already used in biometrics in policing. I'll give you 2 quick examples. One is in relation to the child abuse image database that I referenced that we're having a look at the moment. So there is non-generative, non-autonomous decision-making AI software within that system, which does a number of things like removing harmful content from the web. It saves police officers or members of police staff from having to view thousands of horrible images, etc., etc. The other example I would give you of non-generative AI that's already used in policing is in the UK fingerprint system, Ident1. It has a thing called non-verified live identification. When the police arrest somebody and they take their fingerprints in a custody suite, think of it as like a big photocopier, basically, and it scans the person's fingerprints. And what the artificial intelligence does, within about 20 minutes, if someone's been arrested, who's been in custody before and who provides false particulars to the police, the non-verified AI software will very quickly result in a phone call to the custody centre to say, see that guy that you've got in cell number 3 that says he's Ross MacDonald? He's not, he's Brian Plasto. So those are 2 types of AI that are already in use. The important point to make is that the AI is not used in any evidential capacity. So to use that same example again from the non-verified fingerprint identification, it would then require a forensic scientist. If that was something that was then going to go to court, it then requires a human being, a forensic scientist, to compare the 2 sets of fingerprints and say yes or no. Does that answer your question? So more broadly, to just lead on from that. So I think there is a big place for non-generative AI in policing. So we think about something as complicated as applying weeding regimes to massive biometric data sets. So the UK holds 7 million DNA profiles, 8 million fingerprint records, and way over 20 million plus biometric image templates derived from faces. And all of that becomes very difficult to weed. But by applying some good governance and rules-based systems around that, that's an area where non-generative AI could help. The flip side to that is generative AI. That, for me, autonomous decision-making technology has no place in this space at this moment in time. Biometrics is something that's done to people, by people, and should be for the good of the people, So does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm very grateful. It's very interesting. My second question might be a little more awkward, but I feel I need to ask it to get it out in the public. Your role is to scrutinise the police, at least in part, or to have oversight of the police. And you talked earlier on about public awareness, public perception. You're joined today by Ross MacDonald, who's joined you on secondment from Police Scotland. Now, there's no question of Mr MacDonald's expertise. I can see that from the papers. But Mr MacDonald is seconded and is therefore still an employee or an office holder of Police Scotland. Given that the public perception of that as a secondment may be that there's a question around independence, why was that route chosen? And is there merit in future in looking beyond the police and perhaps beyond the public sector?
Yeah, listen, that's a good question. Thank you for asking it, because it allows me to explain that one. So, part of the reason for seconding someone from Police Scotland is because this is a highly specialised role, and you need a detailed understanding of, to do this job properly, a detailed understanding of how the police use biometric data and technologies, not just from a criminal justice perspective in terms of people arrested by the police, but also from an investigative perspective, and also from a forensic perspective, and also from a multi-agency public protection arrangement perspective. You can't bottle that and teach that to somebody very easily. That is the reason why organisations like the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner rely heavily on people coming to that world with investigative backgrounds and a certain level of lived experience in how the police do this. And that's why His Majesty's Inspector at Constabulary do this sort of thing as well. So it's about bringing expertise into your organisation. Now, for avoidance of any doubt, I am the accountable officer. I'm not allowed by Parliament to discharge that to anyone, so I'm the ultimate decision maker. But Ross brings an incredible wealth of experience to the role, and you just can't, it's just not out there on tap. I understand absolutely the premise of your question, but it's not unique. And of course, that is why it was necessary for me to seek the consent of the Parliament Corporation before doing this. So hopefully that provides you the reassurance that you're looking for.
I understand, that's clear. Thank you. Convener.
Thank you. Sharon Dowie and then Rona Mackay.
Thank you. Good morning. It's to go back in your opening remarks, actually, you'd mentioned about children and biometrics only being taken if it was a violent or sexual offence or by exception. So I wonder if you could expand on that a wee bit, and if you could also tell me what age children are classified as for this, because last night me and some of my colleagues were in a debate in the chamber. There's a huge rise in antisocial behaviour, and a lot of that is caused by youths, children, young people under 24. So what age would you class as a young person? And if you're not taking those details, how are you actually monitoring if someone is a repeat offender before the problem escalates and it then becomes a violent or sexual offence because we've not actually taken action earlier?
Yeah, so a two-part answer, Sharon. Thanks, that's a good question. In terms of our work, we class anybody under 18 as a child. Obviously, a child in Scotland's defined differently under different legislation. But and it is confusion, yeah. But in terms of the work we've done previously, in terms of the piece around the assurance review around children arrested by the police, and looking at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, etc., etc. So we work on anybody that's under 18. But as you rightly point out, in other legislation, you can be regarded as an adult at 16. I suppose the substantive point, the point of reassurance to give to you is that even if the police are not taking biometric data from children who have not committed a serious sexual or violent offence, that doesn't mean to say they're not still recording their details as part of the management of an incident. So, if a young person comes to the attention of the police for the sorts of things that you just described there, the fact that their biometric data is not taken does not change the fact that there is still a record of that transaction engagement with the police. So if they then come to the attention of the police on a second or subsequent occasion, then that is all available to the police, the individual inquiry officer. So it isn't, the point about not taking DNA and fingerprints when you don't need to goes back to the point about weak management information. So, for example, when we did the assurance review in relation to children, we asked Police Scotland, how many children did you arrest in the last 12 months? They could easily tell us. We then asked, how many children did you take DNA from? They could easily tell us. But when we then said, OK, so in taking DNA from those 4,000 children, how many times did the DNA that you took in custody match to an unsolved crime scene? They couldn't tell us. So it's important that they should know, because otherwise, why are they doing it? So does that answer your question at all?
Partly, I think I would maybe have more questions on it. So, at what stage would you actually take biometric details?
The new Police Scotland policy is that if the child is arrested for in connection with violent or sexual offending, then they will capture their biometric data.
I suppose it would probably ask more questions, because we've got the lower police numbers, we've got some crimes where they're saying there isn't evidence that you can follow, so they're not getting investigated, but that might mean that there's no DNA to follow because the police have went and they maybe haven't taken fingerprints at a minor crime, or so it would maybe open up more questions for me, I think. Yeah, well, listen, you're welcome to send in this, and we're happy to answer. But just a very quick point is because I think most people out there who are not involved in the policing world and who maybe watch programmes like Silent Witness, for example, or CSI, they wrongly assume that biometric/forensic data is a feature of all crime. It actually isn't. So a little interesting statistic for you is that if you look at the number of DNA recoveries in the UK that match, where DNA recovered at a crime scene matches to a profile already held by the police, i.e. it matches to somebody who's already been arrested. And when you express that as a percentage of all reported crime, bearing in mind that most crime isn't reported, or a lot of crime isn't reported, if I was to tell you that that's 0.3% of all crime, I'm guessing it probably surprise you, but that's what it is. It's 0.3% of all recorded crime. Just one final...
But has a high qualitative value, particularly in things like murders.
Okay, just one final question. In your evidence to the committee last year, you mentioned your concerns about funding in relation to the use of new technologies, in particular body-worn cameras for Police Scotland. Given another year has passed and they've still not been rolled out, how disappointed are you about the current situation, and do you have confidence that it will be resolved soon?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely support the need for Police Scotland to deploy body-worn video. I've said that a number of occasions. I'm grateful to the Parliament for supporting the funding of that. My understanding is the delays associated with technical issues, like, for example, making sure that individual police stations have the correct plumbing, for want of a better word, so that the docking stations and everything can work. So, yeah, it's a little bit disappointing, but yeah, I guess the scale of the national rollout with so many police officers as we have was always going to bring some technical issues associated with that, I suppose.
Okay. Are you confident that they'll roll it out within a year?
Am I confident? I couldn't express a view on that one way or the other.
Thank you.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Commissioner. I wanted to, well, first of all, from your opening statement, it sounds like you've made great progress, and I'm really pleased about the Children and Vulnerable People initiatives that you've done with Police Scotland. I think that's a really positive move. I wanted to ask you about the plans that Police Scotland have to use to bring in facial recognition, and you know, and how that would impact on your role. And I know this has been talked about for some time, and there have been some concerns raised about the accuracy, etc., etc. So I just wonder if you could talk me through that.
Okay, yeah. So the first thing to say is, as far as I'm aware, Police Scotland have no plans to bring in live facial recognition technology. They plan to have a tripartite conversation around looking at the feasibility initially with myself and with the Scottish Police Authority. So that's a journey that's yet to happen. I mean, I've said before that there are certain limited circumstances where I think this technology, if it works, if it's affordable, and if it was used in a proportionate and necessary way, it could add value in some cases. But I suppose to get to the heart of the question that you just asked, it would depend how they deployed it. If they chose to go down this route, so for example, if Police Scotland were to go down this route and if they were to deploy this technology, for example, in a mobile van, as happens in the Metropolitan Police, there would be no jurisdictional issues for me. If, however, on the other hand, they chose to do it by applying software such as BriefCam, which they've bought, and they chose to do that through a local authority public space safety camera network, then that gives me some jurisdictional issues because I don't have any authority over local authorities. So it would depend, well, firstly, if they do choose to go down that road, and I'm not sure they will, and then if they did, what the delivery mechanism would be. There are also other big questions around this, one being that the quality of images currently held is probably not good enough to support the technology at this time. Because a lot of people kind of think, oh, well, we can do this at a passport gate. Well, yeah, you can, but that's because you've given your passport image in a controlled condition. It has a biometric chip and you're standing 3 feet from a really expensive camera. So that's one issue. And I suppose the other issue is about return on investment. I mean, whatever solution Police Scotland may or may not choose to look at it in the future, they'd have to be satisfied that they got a return on that investment. Because even looking at the Metropolitan Police who do this in actually quite a limited the number of deployments, they've spent well over £500,000, you know, so it wouldn't be cheap. So I guess there's a whole lot of things in the mix, but to go back to my original point, there is no secret plan to do this. It's an area that needs to be discussed.
Sure, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I can just come in. Obviously, part of your role has seen you engaging with partners, whether it's international partners in conferences and other events. And, you know, these are really important opportunities to maybe hear about practice elsewhere or policy development or the direction of travel in other jurisdictions. So I'm just interested in what, if any, particular learning or practice that has come to your notice that you feel may be relevant in the sort of Scottish biometrics landscape?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Often in this territory, there's no right or wrong answer. I kind of try and limit engagement out with Scotland on the grounds of the small scale of my budget. So I go to London twice a year, although Ross will be taking it on for the next year to attend the UK Fine Strategy Board, which basically is the UK oversight board, which looks after the running of the UK DNA database, the UK fingerprint database, and the exchange mechanisms with the European Union Interpol. For the last 2 years, I've been invited to speak at the Biometrics Institute Congress in London, and that's the largest global gathering of biometric policymakers, subject experts in the world. And this year I spoke about the importance of independent oversight. Last year I was speaking about the value of biometrics in solving sometimes impossible crimes. The point I was making about DNA having a high qualitative value. To give you a little practical example, so while I was at the conference in London this year, I had a side meeting with the Department of Homeland Security from the US, and that was just to exchange knowledge and ideas on, for my part, where I think biometrics might go in the policing space in the UK in future, and for their part to share with me some of the emerging technologies that they're using. One being their desire to move away from electronic passport gates completely to what they call walking passport gates. So, for example, at the moment, if you go to the United States of America, you have to scan your passport in advance, fill out a form. And in Dulles Airport in Washington, they're trialling a system just now where you don't even present your passport at a gate. You basically walk through, and only if you're stopped, because the technology doesn't recognise you, are you engaged by a border official. I also have lots of side conversations with people from the Home Office. I mentioned in my last annual report how, at the invitation of the Scottish Government, we went to Scotland House in Brussels and we'd engaged with European colleagues in this space. That allows us to be cited on things like the EU AI Act, etc., etc. So we try to cast our net as widely as possible and to deploy our kind of environmental scanning to understand what's happening in other areas and to assess what might be appropriate for Scotland and what might not be. But, I mean, ultimately, I think the answer to all of that is about, the approach in Scotland has to be right for Scotland.
Thank you. It's fascinating stuff. I wonder if I can just come back into Scotland, as it were, and pick up on a point I think that we discussed in your last session with us. And I think you'd raised the suggestion around the potential to expand your remit to the prison estate. Obviously, because of this, sort of, I suppose, extensive biometric data that exists in that part of the justice sector. So I just wondered if you had any update on that, or is that something, a piece of work that you've been able to move forward?
Yeah, well, no, I haven't been able to move any of that forward, but I'll give you my rationale. So I argue consistently that biometric data is used extensively throughout the entire criminal justice ecosystem. And I understand why initially the Commissioner's functions might be restricted to 3 policing bodies, because the police, whether it's Police Scotland or the Park, have power of arrest and can take biometric data from people without their consent. But that also happens in prisons, because obviously, every prison in Scotland has their fingerprints taken. A lot of the prisons have biometric kiosks, so to save people having difficulty through carrying money, etc. in prisons, they can use biometric kiosks. In fact, even visitors, at least one prison in Scotland, will not be allowed in unless they surrender their biometric data as a condition of entry. I think round about the time that I was last before the committee, I had a discussion with the then Chief Inspector of Prisons, who was quite happy to say, well, look, Brian, I don't really understand much about biometric data. I would welcome some support in this area. I subsequently had a conversation with the Chief Executive Officer of the Scottish Prison Service. I also appeared before the Scottish Government Criminal Justice Board just to say a bit about that. But ultimately, any decision on expansion of remit is a matter for ministers. I'm obviously mindful of the office holder landscape review and the call for no expansion of remit before June of next year. But for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer, you know, because when you start to look at things like DESC, the digital evidence sharing capability, where that criminal offence data, including biometric data, is shared extensively between partners, I can't exercise independent oversight over the whole of DESC, only the bit that the Police Scotland do. And so for me, there are opportunities here. And also in the surveillance space, as it's often wrongly referred to, it should be, you know, we should be talking about public space safety cameras, because that's why local authorities have CCTV systems. It's all about public safety. And increasingly these systems are piped into police control rooms, or police officers are in their control rooms. And if in the future we move forward to, you know, potentially police software interacting with council software, then, you know, some of it gets a bit messy in terms of independent oversight. So, yeah, I mean, I think I've probably said enough on that. I've kind of tried to hammer the point in each of my annual reports. I mean, one thing I would say that there's a requirement in the Scottish Biometrics Commissioners Act that 1 year, no later than 1 year after the expiry of the period of the first strategic plan, ministers should review the functions of the Commissioner. So the first strategic plan expires on the 30th of November 2025. So no later than the 30th of November 2026, ministers are required by the legislation to review functions. Now, that could be about considering, is the function still necessary? It could be that. But it could also, in the legislation, it talks about that being the point where ministers should consider whether any additional bodies should be added or whether any should be removed. So there is a natural point that we're coming to where this function will need to be reviewed anyway. You know, as I said in my evidence to the Public Finance Committee, we actually kind of really look forward to engaging with that piece of work, because I think that we're the model, right, for existing and future bodies to follow, in the sense that everything that we do is a low-cost operating model built around shared services, you know. So we don't have an HR function that's provided to us. Our finance function is provided to us. Our ICT support's provided to us, you know. And so you can imagine, if you kind of complex that up around the whole environment, then there are opportunities there for savings, you know.
Yeah. I wonder if I can just, you mentioned public safety a wee while ago, and that made me think about sort of public awareness of all things biometric. And I noticed in your annual report that you refer to the publication of an easy-read version of the Code of Practice and the complaints procedure. And I presume the spirit of that was to just really make sure that the public understand what the implications are of the use and storage and retention of biometric data. And we spoke earlier on about, I think at the outset, we're talking about children and vulnerable witnesses. And certainly as a constituency MSP, I feel like I'm getting more inquiries from the public about the use of cameras, say from a bedroom window that is potentially encroaching into someone else's property. Now, I know that's not biometrics, but what I'm surprised at is the limited knowledge that people have about these practices and the legislation around things like that. That's really important for us to understand. So I'd be interested in perhaps where you see there's scope to develop public awareness even further, so that we really are not vulnerable to, not fully understanding the implications of the use of biometric data.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think most of us actually, in a non-policing context, love biometric data because it makes our life easy. You know, I mean, we can, you can pay for a coffee with your fingerprint on your iPhone, and you can travel nowadays almost seamlessly through the e-gates at airports, and so people are quite happy to surrender their biometric data if it's convenient to them. What they don't always realise is what then happens with that data. In a policing context, I think most people will go through their entire life without ever having much contact with the police, So, I mean, the figure I gave you earlier on, there are around 90,000 custody episodes in Scotland each year. But as a percentage of the population of Scotland, most people never get arrested by the police, so therefore never have their biometric data taken. So why should they care? I suppose. And for an organisation like us, it's actually quite hard, because I only have 3 members of staff. It's actually quite hard to reach out into the wider public. So we try and rely on partnerships for that. So I always, for example, once a year, I will appear before the SPA board. I will also appear before the SPA policing committee. We try to do as much external engagement as we can, whether that's supporting an academic event at the Leverhulme Institute of Forensic Science, speaking at conferences, we do a bit of that. So, yeah, I mean, it is quite a niche area, this, but I think in terms of getting the message out, this does more than anything. Police Scotland actually giving this to every person who's arrested and who has their biometrics taken allows those people, the data subjects, to know why their data has been taken, what it will be used for, and who it will be shared with. That never used to happen. I was in the police for about 35 years. I never, ever, once in my entire service, I would just say, OK, pal, you've been arrested, we're going to take your fingerprints now and your DNA. That'd be it. So, yeah, it's important, nevertheless, when people who have been arrested and sometimes are at their most vulnerable are nevertheless given their rights. But the point you made, Convener, it's also important for victims and for witnesses, because people will regularly have their devices seized by the police as part of an inquiry, and during the course of examining those devices, the police will uncover data which constitutes biometric data, and so it's important that there's appropriate safeguards and so forth in relation to all of that.
Thank you. Ben McPherson, I think you want to come in with a supplementary?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. You just provoked a question that I've wondered for some time, and it relates to what you were saying about people's travel. And often when entering or exiting other jurisdictions, other countries, biometric data is taken. Through your office, do constituents have any ability, so not in a situation of a criminal justice investigation or any attachment to crime, but just in the process and exercise of travel, and their data is taken? Is there any function through your office for people to inquire whether that data is still held and whether it can be deleted? Do you have that international connectivity, I guess is my question.
I have the connectivity, but it's not part of our jurisdiction. So obviously some of these issues, such as UK border control, are reserved matters to Westminster. So we don't have a function in relation to that. That doesn't stop us giving advice to people. The most frequent telephone call that we have to our office is from people who want to know how to get a biometric permit for Canada for some reason. So, so we actually know how to do that. And Joanna from the office is very good at giving people appropriate advice. But no, so I mean, although we have wider conversations around the use of biometrics in other contexts, this role is specifically about policing and criminal justice. So yeah, people tend not to come to us for those types of inquiries, and if they do, we signpost them to the appropriate organisation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I can just ask a final question, and then we'll draw things to a close. Your annual report obviously helpfully sets out some of the detail around the costs associated with the Commissioner function, which is very helpful. And obviously you gave helpful evidence at the recent Finance Committee review of the Commissioner landscape. So I suppose going forward, obviously that's now been debated in Parliament, and there is agreement that there will be a review process. So what we've heard today has been really helpful in understanding the technical nature of the biometrics Commissioner. So I suppose I'm just interested in any sort of last reflections that you have about the importance and the relevance of this particular role, which from today I don't think we've got any doubt about. Yeah.
I mean, I always say to people that the distinctiveness of what we do, or what I do, it's about providing assurance to Parliament that biometric data has been used lawfully, effectively and ethically where it's acquired in Scotland under domestic criminal procedure law. So, and that's important because our National Police Service, Police Scotland, the second biggest police force in the UK, they hold massive amounts of biometric data. Some people would argue too much. As I've said earlier on, sometimes that data is acquired from people, whether that be accused persons, victims, witnesses, when they're at their most vulnerable. And so it's just important that there is a level of independent oversight that cannot be delivered by the Scottish Police Authority in this case, because the Scottish Police Authority provide the forensic services to Police Scotland and jointly administer the DNA and the fingerprint arrangements. So, I mean, I think it's a good value for money, low cost public service that the Parliament made a good decision on when they passed this legislation back in 2020, and I suppose they will have an opportunity in 2026 to make their own mind up about how effective that's been or otherwise. So, and the numbers in the annual report speak from themselves. If you strip out the salaries, our operating costs were £65,000 for the year. £19,000 of that was audit. So if you strip out the audit costs, the cost of running the organisation, excluding salaries, £46,000 for a year. And I think that's pretty good value for public money.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Okay, thank you very much. We'll draw our session to a close. Thank you for attending this morning. It's been really interesting. And that completes our business in public this morning, and we'll now move into private session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.